I would just say be sure you know that it's what you want to do, and then don't stop trying.
Johnny Cash was known as the Man in Black, a figure who carried the weight of America's heartbreak in his voice. He sang for the prisoners, the poor, the lost, and the forgotten. But compassion did not mean tolerance. Cash believed music was sacred, and when he felt someone betrayed that calling, his judgment was swift, unflinching, and unforgettable.
When I was just a baby, my mama told me, son.
Cash understood truth, rhythm, and grit. To him, songs were covenants between artist and audience. Break that covenant with cheap spectacle or hollow posturing, and you were not just making bad music, you were committing a sin against the craft itself. He had seen the circus up close. He knew when performance drowned out sincerity, when style smothered substance, when fame overshadowed truth. Cash never needed glamour to hold a stage. He needed only honesty. He admired many, forgave some, but hated a few. And when Cash drew that line, he never erased it. Here are the 6 artists who landed on the dark side of Johnny Cash's judgment, and why he could never forgive them. Number 1, Elvis Presley. Elvis was a friend, a rival, and ultimately a disappointment. Cash admired the young Presley, the raw Sun Records rebel who could shake the world with a single note. But as Presley drifted into Hollywood spectacle and Las Vegas glitter, Cash grew cold. He saw a man swallowed by fame, a voice buried under rhinestones. To Cash, Elvis had traded gospel fire for empty flash, and that betrayal cut deep. In the early years, their paths ran parallel. Both recorded at Sun Records in Memphis, both carried the spirit of Southern gospel, and both embodied the hunger of rock and roll's birth. Cash spoke warmly of those first sessions, praising Presley's natural magnetism. But as the decades unfolded, he watched Elvis drift further from those roots. The rebel who once shook church rafters with sincerity was now lost in neon, crooning through formulaic film soundtracks. Elvis had the world in his hands, Cash once remarked, but somewhere along the way, he let the music slip through his fingers. To Cash, authenticity was not optional. When Presley leaned on costumes, choreography, and production numbers, Cash saw not evolution but surrender.
You ain't nothing
Cash believed that an artist's soul was revealed when stripped bare. One man, one guitar, one truth. Presley's Vegas years, bloated with orchestras and excess, struck him as the opposite. A song has to stand on its own, Cash often said. If it can't move people without the glitter, it isn't worth playing. The irony was that Cash never lost affection for Presley the man. He grieved his struggles, mourned his decline, and honored his impact. But as a craftsman, he felt betrayed. The Elvis he admired was the boy with a guitar and a fire that could not be bought. The Elvis he despised was the brand, the empire, the prisoner of his own fame.
I shot a man in Reno.
For Johnny Cash, Elvis Presley was both a friend and a warning, proof that fame without faith corrodes the soul of music. Number 2, Merle Haggard. Though both were country rebels, Cash bristled at Haggard's sharp tongue and political barbs. Where Cash sang for prisoners and outcasts with empathy, Haggard often came with judgment. Their styles clashed, Cash's universality against Haggard's bitterness. It was not just a rivalry of sound, it was a rivalry of philosophy. Cash's music was born in prisons, in coal towns, in the dust of the forgotten. He wanted his songs to comfort the condemned and to shame the powerful. Haggard, by contrast, often spoke for a different America, defensive, skeptical, eager to draw lines. His anthem, Okie from Muskogee, was both beloved and notorious, a song Cash saw as drawing borders where music should have built bridges. The people in prison are still human, Cash insisted. They deserve to be remembered in song. Haggard, himself once imprisoned at San Quentin, wrote from experience too, but his words often carried scorn rather than solidarity. Cash never forgot the men he sang for at Folsom and San Quentin, and he recoiled when art was used to divide instead of heal.
Now I talk, weeping willow, I cry.
There was professional tension as well. Both men stood tall in the same era of country music, but where Cash leaned into gospel universality, Haggard leaned into political identity. I want my music to stand for everyone, not just one side, Cash said in interviews. That difference, bridge versus barricade, created a chasm between their legacies. The irony was sharp. Both men carried the outlaw label. Both had scars from prison life, yet they told opposite truth. Cash mourned injustice. Haggard often mocked it. To Cash, that distortion was not just disappointing, it was dangerous, a reminder of how music could be weaponized against the very people it should uplift. For Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard was proof that even fellow rebels could betray the spirit of the rebellion. Number 3, the Rolling Stones. Cash had little use for British rock royalty. He saw the Stones' excess, the drugs, the spectacle, the decadent tours, as the very opposite of what music should be. To Cash, rock and roll was not about glamour. It was about blood and dirt. He dismissed the Stones as provocateurs who turned rebellion into theater, leaving truth behind. Johnny Cash's stage was built on restraint. One man with a guitar could command thousands if the words rang true. When he looked at the Rolling Stones, he saw a carnival. Elaborate lights, scandalous antics, and a band feeding as much on headlines as on songs. Music has to come from the heart, Cash once said. If it's just for the show, it won't last. The Stones embodied everything Cash distrusted about spectacle. Their shows sprawled for hours, built on volume and posture, while Cash measured greatness in a lyric that could stop a room. Where he sang of the downtrodden, the Stones played with decadence, celebrating chaos instead of confronting it. Cash, rooted in gospel and country, believed excess blurred truth. A song has to mean something to someone who's hurting, he often remarked. For him, rebellion was real only when it spoke for the silenced. The Stones' version of rebellion felt like theater, staged for arenas rather than born in suffering.
I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down.
There was admiration for their craft, but little patience for their image. Cash understood survival in music came from honesty, not from spectacle. The Stones had mastered provocation. He wanted revelation. To him, they turned rebellion into costume, stripping it of its moral weight. For Johnny Cash, the Rolling Stones were proof that some revolutions burn bright but hollow. Rebellion without truth is just another show. Number 4, Bob Dylan. Ironically, Cash and Dylan shared respect and even recorded together. Yet Cash often voiced frustration at Dylan's cryptic lyrics and evasive persona. He admired Dylan's gift, but despised what he saw as a deliberate wall between artist and audience. Cash believed songs should cut straight to the heart. Dylan's riddles felt like betrayal wrapped in poetry. Their relationship began with admiration. Cash introduced Dylan on stage in the 1960s, defending him against critics who mocked his electric shift. They recorded Girl from the North Country together, a performance still remembered for its beauty. But beneath the collaboration lingered unease. Dylan's labyrinthine verses, dense with metaphors, left Cash wary. He saw in Dylan's genius a tendency to hide behind puzzles. The song ought to be plain enough to reach the man in the back row, Cash remarked. For him, music's power lay in clarity, sorrow, hope, and redemption offered without disguise. Dylan's mystery, while brilliant, could feel like evasion.
When a couple live over to the side of the road.
Cash himself was no stranger to poetry, but he wielded it like a blade, sharp, simple, designed to cut straight through. He distrusted art that seemed designed to confuse. If a man's hurting, you don't hand him a riddle, he once said. That sentiment defined his frustration with Dylan. Brilliance without accessibility was brilliance wasted. The irony was that Cash admired Dylan's courage, even envied his innovation. He respected the way Dylan reshaped music, but he rejected the distance it created. To Cash, music was a conversation with the broken. Dylan often made it feel like a lecture to the initiated. For Johnny Cash, Bob Dylan was a paradox, an artist he praised, recorded with, even loved as a peer, but one whose mysteries left him cold. Respect endured, but the frustration never faded. Number 5, Kiss. Few things angered Cash more than spectacle without soul. Kiss, with their makeup, pyrotechnics, and merchandising empire, became his perfect example of style over substance. To Cash, music was sacred. Kiss turned it into a circus. Behind the fire and flash, he heard little of the authenticity he lived by. Cash's view of music was forged in the bare bones of country and gospel, where truth was measured in the quiet between notes. When he looked at Kiss, he saw explosions, costumes, and theatrics drowning out the song itself. "If the music can't stand when the lights go out, it isn't worth much," he once said. That philosophy stood in direct opposition to a band built on spectacle. Kiss wasn't just a band. They were an empire. Lunchboxes, comic books, dolls, every product stamped with their faces. To Cash, this commercial carnival diluted the sanctity of song. He believed that music should serve the soul, not the marketplace. Where Kiss saw opportunity, Cash saw surrender. "A song is a prayer," Cash often told interviewers, "and you don't sell prayers like candy." For him, the sacredness of music meant responsibility. Kiss's endless branding and pyrotechnics felt like mockery of that belief. There was no denying their popularity. Crowds adored the fire and costumes, and their shows filled arenas worldwide. But to Cash, popularity without depth was hollow. He did not begrudge them their success, but he despised the message it carried, that noise and image could outweigh truth and heart. To him, this was not progress. It was corrosion, a cheapening of art's very purpose. For Johnny Cash, Kiss represented everything he fought against. Music turned into merchandise, faith turned into fireworks, and authenticity drowned beneath the smoke. Number 6. John Lennon. Though he respected Lennon's talent, Cash distrusted his public crusades and sharp-edged wit. Where Lennon often sought shock and headlines, Cash sought quiet conviction. To Cash, Lennon represented a new generation of rock stars who blurred sincerity with provocation, more interested in making noise than making truth. Cash admired the Beatles' early fire and never denied Lennon's genius as a songwriter. Songs like Help and Imagine proved to him that Lennon had a voice capable of reaching millions. But the way Lennon used that voice troubled him. Public demonstrations, biting interviews, and a sharp tongue often overshadowed the music itself. "A song ought to outlive the headlines," Cash once remarked. To him, art should endure when the noise of politics faded away.
All our society is run by insane people for insane objectives.
Cash himself was no stranger to controversy. His Man in Black persona was a political statement in its own right. Yet his activism was wrapped in humility and service, never designed to shock for its own sake. Lennon's methods, staging bed-ins, mocking authority, turning interviews into theater, felt to Cash like spectacle at the expense of substance. "The truth doesn't need a circus," Cash said in one interview. That line captured his frustration with Lennon's approach. For Cash, sincerity was strongest when it was quiet, steady, and lived rather than performed. Lennon's brilliance often dissolved into provocation, and provocation into noise. There was respect between them, but never alignment. Lennon sought revolution through shockwaves. Cash sought redemption through song. Both men reached the world, but they traveled in opposite directions. For Johnny Cash, John Lennon was a mirror of everything he resisted. Talent eclipsed by spectacle, conviction blurred by provocation, and truth drowned beneath the noise of headlines. Johnny Cash lived by a code, and he carried it into every note he sang. For him, music was never just sound, it was testimony. Songs had to tell the truth, to serve the broken, and to outlast the spotlight. That conviction shaped not only the artists he honored, but also the ones he could never forgive. The names he rejected, Presley in decline, Haggard with his barbs, the Stones in excess, Dylan in riddles, Kiss in spectacle, Lennon in headlines, were more than grudges. Each was a warning about what happens when ego, noise, or image eclipse sincerity. By naming them, Cash revealed a philosophy. Truth survives while artifice fades. His voice, stripped bare, remains proof of that belief. Johnny Cash hated very little, but when he did, it was because he loved music too much to let it be betrayed. What do you think of Cash's choices? Share your thoughts and subscribe for more untold stories.